And welcome everyone to Monday, October 28th. Our agenda is the budget meeting tonight, and we call this meeting to order. Ask everyone, please ensure your cell phones are turned off or are on mute. And we welcome those who are in the gallery with us this evening and those that are going to be presenting. And thanks to staff who are here also to provide information for us so that we make best decisions on behalf of the municipality. And we welcome those who are participating by Zoom. And all members of council are here except for Deputy Mayor Dietrich. I understand he may be joining us shortly. And item number 2, please.
That South Huron Council approves the agenda as presented.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Oak. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That carries with 6. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are there any disclosures at this time? And not seeing any, we go on to 4.1, our budget presentation. We welcome Mr. Henry. Andrew, welcome. And proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to discuss the recently approved 2025 budget for the Lake Huron and Elgin Area Water Supply System. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Henry, and I'm the Director of Regional Water for both the Lake Huron and Elgin Area Water Supply Systems. I've been asked to provide you with an overview of the recently approved budgets for the regional water supply system that supplies the municipality of South Huron and other communities in this region of southwestern Ontario. While the development and complexity of this utility's budgets may be considered a much simpler process than those of our municipal counterparts, there are nonetheless some significant considerations and some complexities that we are required to deal with in the development and managing our ongoing budgets. Sorry, 2 more. There we go. So in simplified terms, our operating budget is an intrinsic balance between revenues, expenses, and contributions to our reserve funds. Next. So unlike municipalities, our revenues are almost entirely the charges for the water supply to the benefiting municipalities, with only minor components associated with specific charges and interests. While most of our expenses are relatively fixed, there are some minor components affected by the variability of supplied volumes, and we use the contributions to reserves to balance those budgets. So if the actual volume supplied by the varies from what we anticipated in establishing the budgets, the contributions to reserves are either reduced or increased in order to address those budget shortfalls and surpluses, keeping the budget in balance. So the reserve funds are funded almost entirely through the current year budget contributions at year end, with an infrequent contributions from new communities that may join our system from time to time. The reserve funds are dedicated in 3 components: the asset replacement reserve, used to fund like-for-like replacements and investments of existing assets and maintaining our levels of service. The new capital reserve is used to enhance our levels of service, address growth-related investments, or undertake studies for future requirements. And the emergency reserve is used as a contingency allowance for catastrophic failures and emergency expenses. These 3 reserves, in whole or in part, are used to fund our capital budgets. So as you might realize, the annual volume that we include in our budget that we supply municipalities is a significant factor in creating our budget. If we don't get that right on an annual basis, we're in for a world of trouble. So as we proceed, for 2025, the model estimates the total annual volume for 2025 at just over 49.5 million cubic meters for the year. This is a net increase of 1.5% over 2024 and consistent with our long-term projections for the region. So historically, you can see that the actual supplied volume can vary seasonally, can vary each year and from year over year, while affected by weather, community growth. Between 2002 and 2015, we saw an overall reduction in consumption of more than 10 million cubic meters in that over that time period, or sorry, in 1 year, despite the growth observed in all communities and the addition of communities like Strathroy, Exeter, and Hensel to the regional water system. So this is largely due to the implemented conservation initiatives within the municipalities, as well as the impact of long-term changes in the building code that's as related to efficiency of fixtures and appliances. Even though the served population is significantly increasing over that time period, the actual consumption is significantly decreased. And we're now coming out of that period. And I've highlighted in here that brief moment in time where we went through a global pandemic. And even then it has that variability over that period. So there are 4 major components that make out our operating budget, namely contracted services and utilities, administration and other expenses, debt servicing, and the contributions to reserves. When we look at the percentages, those changes seem somewhat disproportionate when we consider the total value. But when you look at that total value, the actual changes are much more appropriate in that detail. You can see a small percentage increase in that excuse me, in that contracted services has almost as much increase as a large percentage increase in our administration and other services. So let's talk about what makes up some of those components. So contracted services, including the cost of our contracted operating authority, currently makes up 72% of the 11.5 million in the 2025 budget just for contracted services, while energy is only 27%. Historically, energy was closer to 35 and almost 40% in some of those years. However, ongoing efficiency programs and capital improvements have significantly reduced the total expense associated with energy, now amounting to more than $1 million per year in annual savings and cost avoidance. Optimization and efficiency related programs have the potential to significantly impact and reduce operating costs, particularly when it comes to electricity, chemicals, and other consumables. With respect to administration and other expenses, personnel costs contribute 43% of the 2025 operating budget. Within this component, we look at the best balance between internal resources versus external purchase services, including the services that we purchase from the City of London. We manage that on a contingent. We also manage a number of contingent liabilities within that budget area. So when we think about inflation, the most common indicator that people normally think about is the Consumer Price Index. So prior to the global pandemic, CPI was typically held to about 2.2% within Ontario. But during the pandemic, we saw that jump to somewhere between 5 and 6%. And even as the economy recovers from that pandemic, we're still seeing inflationary indices in the order of 2.5 to 3%. Regardless, the index continues to show signs of further recovery. So the Consumer Price Index is a measure as it impacts people in their lives and considers things like groceries, entertainment, gasoline for vehicles, and other personal expenses. As a utility, we're not buying bread and milk. And even last year, we saw significant price changes in the operating costs, even as that economy recovered. For example, powder activated carbon that we use for taste and odor control, up 40% in 1 year. Sodium hydroxide for the management of the pH in water, up 23% in 1 year. Aluminum sulfite for coagulation and the removal of those suspended solids, up 10%. And most notably, chlorine disinfection up 120%, more than doubling in cost. So I'm going to speed ahead here. So the drivers on our operating budget are typically increasing costs in energy, chemical, and labors. Inflation, of course, having a significant factor. Additional personnel that are required to address capital programs, health and safety and finance, service fees charged by the City of London, cybersecurity, IoT, which is our SCADA systems, and of course, leased space. So if you do get to look at our budget document that we share with our board, included near the end is a simple flow and financial analysis summary. It's a convenient table that shows percentage increase in our rates as currently predicted, our revenues, our expenses within those components, and the contributions to reserves as needed. It's a very handy reference. So the objectives and guidelines that we use in creating our budgets, we look at assessing both the efficiency and effectiveness of our initiatives and operations. We consistently check to make sure that it's within the financial plan, which we update every 5 years. And we validate our assumptions every single year. We look at consumption and growth. We look at the input costs, and we make sure that we develop this project or this budget using a zero-based budget approach. So we're trying to balance affordability, generational equity, capital reinvestment, long-term growth, regulatory requirements in order to achieve that sustainability. So let's have a quick look at our reserve funds. The asset replacement reserve is used to invest in existing assets, maintaining their levels of service. We try and keep our reserve fund ending balance in the order of about $7.5 million per year. That is on average over our financial planning period, our need on an annual basis currently. New capital. So the new capital reserve is used to finance growth-related capital and enhancing our levels of service. Any kind of improvement to our system is funded in whole or in part using this reserve fund. So of course, this reserve is going to vary greatly over a period of time. We'll build it up in order to try and pay for things like a possible reservoir expansion, $100 million sometime in the distant future. Potentially updating the pumps, the high lift pumps at the plant, or the remaining pumps at the plant, as well as the booster station near McGilvery, $15 million. The emergency reserve is just that. In the event of a catastrophic failure of the system or the pipeline that might occur, we can draw upon this reserve on an emergency basis in order to allow to address these infrastructure failures before having to go to insurance or the board for supplementary approval. By board policy, we target a $5 million balance, at which point we stop contributing to that reserve fund, just earning interest in the meantime. As things happen, like massive shoreline erosion exposing and damaging our shoreline infrastructure, we would draw upon that in order to address that immediate need. 2025 budget, as we round out this presentation. I'm not going to go through into the details, but here's a very large summary for you, literally. 55 projects just this year we're currently managing for the Lake Huron system only, not including Elgin. It's roughly in the order of about $78.5 million. 2025 capital budget adds another 30 projects in the order of about $23 million. So the majority of that is just maintaining our levels of service, with 9 of those projects potentially enhancing our levels of service or addressing growth-related issues. All of this between both systems, we're doing with a staff of 2 engineers, 2 technologists, 1 senior technologist, and that staff is shared with the Elgin area water system. So in total, in 2025, that number of staff will be managing 130 capital projects. So needless to say, we need a little bit of help in our long-term plan, which is now built into our operating budget to address additional staff. So Mr. Mayor, with that, that's a brief outline of our 2025 operating and capital budgets. I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
And great presentation, Andrew. I always look forward to listening you speak. Well done. Any questions from members of council at this time? Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Andrew. That was good, high level. I like that flow and financial analysis summary. Just a couple questions on it. There's a column called other revenue, and projected for 26, 27, 28. It's got 25 in there, versus the 987 for this year. And then down below, the debt servicing costs line only shows 45 across for those years, versus, you know, the 900s. I'm just wondering why that's saying 45. What's dropping off, or is this just incremental for those years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's a number of things that are happening. In 2025, we anticipate completing our connection to the Oneida Nation of the Oneida Nation of the Thames. That First Nation is joining our system. With that, there's a buy-in charge to ensure that there's adequate assets available for that additional community. And essentially they're reinvesting that money that would have otherwise been paid for by future generations. So that's that 987. Well, in part was $987,000 is that buy-in charge. Normally our other revenue is typically interest. We try and balance our interest expense on working capital versus our interest on revenues. On average, we look about $25,000 per year only. Some years it comes in more, some years it does not. So the other thing that is happening is previous expenses where we were required to take on debentures are now retiring in and around 2025. So you'll see that cost of debt servicing is coming down. And actually in a few more years, you'll see it almost drop off entirely. At this point, we're not projecting, knock on wood, we're not projecting the need for debt unless a significant long-term growth-related capital comes up that we can't otherwise use reserve funds to pay for.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to follow up. One last thing on that slide. Just the 5% rate increase for last year, for this coming year, and then it's projected for the next 4 or 5 years, significantly higher than inflation. Just wondering the explanation behind the constant 5% increase.
So again, Mr. Mayor, we're balancing a number of issues. 5% increase is reflective of our inflationary as we see it as a utility, not as a home consumer or residential consumer. As I said, many of our chemicals, including chlorine, significant increases in those costs, but we're using savings and cost avoidance in order to offset those inflations. Our financial plan, we use that to look out over more than 35 years. We revisit that every 5 years, updated every 5 years. It's anticipating that we will likely have a very large growth-related project coming in the near future or in the medium future, where we may have to rely on reserve funds much more than we have in the past. So where we are trying to do is we're trying to balance the use of debt versus the reserve fund. And this is where generational equity comes in. If we undertake that growth-related project using solely debt, that debt is actually carried by every single municipality that we serve in a proportion to the amount that they take. So right now, the City of London, for example, they consume about 83% of the water that the facility produces. They hold 83% of the system's debt on their financial statements. Same as South Huron, there's a proportionate share, North Middlesex, Blue Water, all of that. If we take on a debt, say in the order of about $100 million, that's $83 million that London has to carry on their financial statement, affecting their FIRs, their ability to borrow for things like roads, transportation, recreational facilities, all of that. It affects everything. So we try and use the reserve fund to the extent possible, but still use debentures where it's appropriate to balance the generational equity. It's a very fine line that we're trying to balance, but it does mean that the current generation has to carry a little bit more than we would have otherwise if we were to be able to take on debt on our own.
Great. Any other questions? What's the population that the Lake Huron Water Supply System serves in that capacity?
We have to estimate it, and going by my not great memory, I believe it's in the order of about 450 to 475,000 people.
Thank you. And the whole system, Elgin and Lake Huron, would serve how many?
That is almost 600,000.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Andrew? Councillor Milt Dietrich, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you too, Andrew, for your presentation. Can you tell me why the chemicals are so expensive, like your chlorine? And the reason I asked this, my wife and I were in Walmart the other day, and she happened to spy a little jug of Javex. And she says, good Lord, that's $4 or $5. Used to get one 2 years ago for $2. So why? Can you explain that one?
Mr. Mayor, at the risk of a rather lengthy response, the market dictates the price, but also the availability of suppliers. In the past 5 years or so, there was a lot of consolidation within the manufacturing side, where they were making chemicals and products and that sort of thing. But at the same time that was happening, we're also seeing changes in legislation in both US, Canada, and Europe for things like the elimination of the use of asbestos diaphragms in the creation of chlorine and other products, which is forcing the industry to modify and use much more costly manufacturing techniques in order to produce these essential chemicals. We're seeing fires in Buffalo that are destroying manufacturers' facilities, and we're having to get it from different sources. Hurricanes in the Gulf Coast of the continental US, surprise, surprise, hurricanes are destroying industries down there and affecting the price. So we're constantly looking at the optimal location for obtaining it, security of sources, to making sure that we can get them on a timely fashion. But at the same time, globally, we're seeing the cost of products and materials increasing at a disproportionate rate to CPI.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions for Councillor Vaughn? Go ahead, please.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to see you again. Okay, earlier in the presentation, you were talking about historical supply and demand. It might have been at the top of that slide. And you were mentioning that there was quite a dip several years ago in terms of demand, from consumers, from industry, and now it's on the rise. And I'm wondering if you might be able to give us an indication of why it is that it went to the big dip, to the bottom out, and now it's on the rise.
Mr. Mayor, soapbox time for me. So in 2002, the population that we served, I believe we estimated it somewhere in the order of about 325,000, significantly less than what we are now. So as the population increases, communities join our pipeline and our service. So our service area and our consumer, the number of our consumers is increasing. But in that same time period, there was changes in legislation that is really pushing at conservation initiatives within municipal distribution systems. On top of that, building code has also been changing, forcing things like low flow shower heads, water efficient fixtures, washers, that sort of thing, low flow toilets. So even though the population is increasing, and the number of industry that is increasing, they're getting much more efficient in what they're consuming. So the amount of water per person or the amount of water for a certain type of industry is decreasing. So our service population, our estimated service population has increased, but the total volume that we produce is decreasing over that time period. But you can only get so much in water in efficiency in the low flows before the system starts to stabilize. And that's what we saw in around 2015, where the effects of the building code changes, the effects of conservation initiatives, you've gotten the most out of it based on the existing technology. And now consumption, the increase in population, the additional consumers, the additional industry is starting to eclipse that, and why we're seeing that rise once again. So you're seeing massive investments in industry to make sure that they're as water efficient as possible. But now there are much more industry that we're serving. City of London is has a big industrial component to their water consumption. That's driven a lot of it, but that's not just the City of London. Most communities are starting to see those same increases. So is that?
Yes, that does. I remember from being on the water board years ago, listening to you talk about conservation efforts from individuals, really. We're really driving down our ability to bring in variable revenues, which we still had so much in fixed costs that we had to. So I remember you speaking of that being quite an exercise to try to balance between the two. And so when I saw that slide, it reminded me of that, and I wanted to know what changed. Thanks.
Great. Thanks again. And any other questions? Not seeing any. Thanks very much, Andrew. Well done. Ms. Masu Coulson, please.
That South Huron Council received the presentation from Lake Huron Water Supply System regarding 2025 operating budget overview as presented by Andrew Henry.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Milt Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That carries with 7. Thank you. And then we're under 4.2, we welcome Paul Seaback. Paul, welcome. Good to have you here, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I guess our report's similar to prior years. There's the full audited financial statements. Seems to get thicker every year. There's lots of information in there. We can go over that quickly. And we also do a 2-page report that has a little more detail, a 5-year comparison, etc. When we finished our audit, we're issuing a clean and unqualified auditor's report. It's in the audit. It states that in our financial statements present fairly in all material respects the performance and cash flows of the municipality according to Canadian public sector accounting standards. As per, there was a management letter included. We did not find any to report to council any unusual significant matters such as journal entries, purchases, etc. At the end of the audit, there were no outstanding issues such as disagreements over estimates, liabilities, policies, etc. And as in prior years, when we received complete cooperation from finance department, everything we asked for is provided. And also we go to most of the other departments like recreation, utilities, etc. So that's appreciated. When we talk about consolidated financial statements, it includes not a lot. It's 100% of your BIA and your share of the Kirkton Woodham Pool and Community Center. One thing I always try to emphasize when you look at the surplus for this year, it's $8.6 million, and you like to be able to explain that compared to what your budget generates. The biggest issue there is when you prepare your budget, you expense your capital assets where we set them up and depreciate them. So last year you spent $10.2 million on assets and we depreciated 3.2 million. So that the difference in the expense there is 6.9 million. So you take that 8 million, subtract that right away, it really reduces your surplus as to how it's prepared to your budget. Other items that are different, you expense your principal payments where we don't, because you're raising cash for items. Same with your reserve fund transfers. We don't treat those as income or expenses. We allocate it, the reserves at the end of the surplus, but we don't expense it. Of course, that's a huge part of your budget. So to go over, I guess another thing to mention is, we have to prepare the statements, public sector accounting required by the province. And the statements are important because the statements in your FIR are presented to the ministry, and that's how they see you when they make certain decisions. So as I stated, the surplus was 8.6 million. Last year was 6.6. Of course, when we look later, your surplus on a cash basis is much lower. This was the second year you had a heavy capital year, 10.2 million. Last year was 11 million. You had budgeted to spend 18.5 million. There was a report prepared that showed the items that weren't created or completed. And they'll be carried on to where they were carried to 2024. So what happens a bit when you look at the statements, because you didn't do all these projects, you didn't spend the money, your bank's a little higher and reserve funds are higher. So we'll see that later too. Your municipal debt, 22.6 million. During the year, you borrowed 2,058,000. That was to complete the work at the two recreation centers, South Huron and Stephen Township. So that increased the debt, but you paid down 1.2 million on just your regular debt payments. And that's how you arrive at the 22.6. There is, the province does calculate a limit of what your borrowing can be, and you're basically around 1/3 of that limit. So you're well within that limit. The reserves are up 2.6 million and 28.4 million. Part of that is because you didn't complete all the water sewer projects you had planned. That would have reduced your reserves. And there's something called deferred revenue. At the end of the year, there's some gas taxes and provincial grants that weren't spent in 2023. So they're allowed to be carried forward for a couple of years. And they were 495,000. And then the one thing that's new this year is when you go through the audited or the consolidated financial statements, you'll see under 2022, it's restated. And you probably wonder, oh, why is the auditor restating your year? There was a new accounting policy called asset retirement obligation. And it's very similar to what you previously had was the landfill closure policy. So what you're trying to do is figure out how much money you need today to pay for your landfill closure and the upkeep of that in the future. And so the policy is just a bit different. So it created a slightly different number. So when we restated 2022, that expense was 101,000 less. So that's why it's restated. It's not because there was an error or anything. It's just retroactively applying a new accounting policy. The first page of our report is basically the balance sheet. So you see your bank, 18.4 million. It's up about 800,000 from last year. That's because your reserves are higher. You have a reserve fund bank account that's higher. Taxes receivable are higher, but almost 571,000 to 779 are current. So you're fairly up to date on those. Accounts receivable are pretty steady. A lot of that is your water sewage billings that haven't been collected yet. Your investments, you have two high interest savings accounts, 9.9 million. And when we look at the revenue, you'll see because there are high interest savings accounts, of course, interest rates were higher, your interest recoverable was high. So 32.9, almost 33 million of assets, up 1.4 million from 2022. Things you owed at the end of the year, standard ones, payables, deferred revenue. I've kind of talked about that. That's development charges plus some grants, 500,000 of grants you hadn't spent during the year. There's a bit of an error there. That 7.5 should be moved up a line to where it says asset retirement obligation. So it's kind of compares the 7.5 to the old calculation under the landfill closure of 6 million. That number is created by your engineer. The municipal debt, you can see it's up 700,000 because you increased it by 2 million, you paid down 1.2. So total liabilities, 36.5 million. And then you see net financial assets, it's negative. And that's not really, normally negative is a bad thing, but this is explainable because your debt goes up top and your assets are below this line. So, comparative 5 years ago, you're at 6.9 million. It's come down to 3.5. So it's just your debt that's, you've had two really heavy years, 11.5 million capital 2022, 10.2 last year. So that's just, you've had some more debt, and these assets, basically converting current assets into assets, and they're below the line. And then at the very bottom, where it breaks down your surplus, it says reserves 28.4 million, and we'll see a listing on that. The income statement is the second page, and not to go through everything there. Other capital grants are lower. That's because you didn't do all the projects you would have got funded. Recreation revenue is creeping back up from previous to COVID, so that's positive. When you look at bank interest and penalty on interest or taxes, you'll see 1.5 million. That's a fair increase from last year because higher interest rates. Of course, now interest rates are going down a bit, so you have to, factor that into your budget. I'm sure you will. So total revenue, 29,097,000. All your expenditures. So on that very beginning, we're expensing the capital and including your transfers from reserves. So you can see when you take that 29 million revenue minus 29.8, you're coming with a deficit. Of course, some other adjustments, 754,000. Then when we don't expense the capital and we treat depreciation of 3.2 million, you come back to the larger surplus. So basically it's the difference between the capital and depreciation that's driving that large surplus number. For the full financial statements, there is a new page. Very first page, it's actually on your letterhead, management's responsibility for the financial statements. That's required by the accounting standards again. And what it's just saying more, I guess, it says it's basically the same as the auditor's report. It's saying that the statements are the responsibility of management, and we're independent as auditors. As auditors, we don't want to be involved in checking our own work per se. So that's what this statement is saying. Then there's the standard auditor's report. It's a clean audit report. If you were to go to page 4 of the notes, there's quite a lengthy note on change in accounting policy. That's the asset retirement obligation. I'll be going forward for years, for the next few years. So that just states why we restated 2022 in your opening surplus. If you go to page 6 of the notes, note number 8, asset retirement obligations, that is actually the note. There used to be a note there for the landfill, so it's quite similar. Obviously, the South Huron landfill site is opened, and the other two ones are closed. So that money is mostly set aside for the South Huron when it closes. Very important, schedule number 9, municipal debt. Majority of your debt is user pay through water and sewer projects that are funded by rates, water sewer rates. The last couple of years, you've added some new debt, basically for recreation, the arena, the pool, and the new arena works for both arenas. So now your debt is $22.6 million. And the last schedule would be reserves. At the back, it shows that beginning of 2023, your reserves are 25.8 million. You didn't do all your capital, didn't pull some of that money out to fund the capital. So at the end of the year, your surplus or your reserves are 28.4 million, up $2.6 million. So you'll have that money to complete the projects in 24 that weren't complete in 2023. Does anyone have any questions on either reports?
Any questions from members of council? Doesn't look like it. No. Oh, Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Paul, for the synopsis. The Kirkton Pool and Community Center now, Perth South is the administrating body for that. You don't prepare that statement anymore. It's their auditor.
Well, actually, we're their auditor.
You're their auditor as well? Okay.
So we have prepared that statement.
Okay. Will we get a copy of that then as
Yeah,
a
for sure.
50% owner in those facilities? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great presentation, Paul. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much and good luck with your 2025 budget.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ms. Masood Coulson, please.
That South Huron Council received the review of the 2023 audited financial statements by Seabach and Company LLP as presented by Paul Seabach.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That carries with 7. Thank you. Number 5, and number 6, we'll head into that. Ms. Masood Coulson.
Prior to handing it over to Aaron, I just had a couple of things to say. To start off with, saying that the municipal budget process is a mandated governance activity that enables municipalities like South Huron to strategically plan, allocate resources, and prioritize community needs for the upcoming fiscal year. Staff reviewed council's strategic priorities during the development of this budget. Each department submitted its budget request based on their operational needs and the strategic goals. Finance teams consolidated the budgets and identified potential areas for efficiencies. The draft budget is now being presented to council for a detailed review and input. There are a number of different master plans and other documents that feed into the budget process that inform the budget, and one such plan is the asset management plan. Council was updated on the asset management plan at the budget basics meeting, and South Huron has met the requirements so far and is on track to meet the 2025 timelines and determine the levels of service. The budget that will be presented to council is the detailed 2025 operating budget estimates, including a summary for each division on changes over the previous year. Council has also provided the in-year capital budget along with a 10-year capital budget forecast. The 10-year capital budget identifies and allows council to schedule capital investments and manage infrastructure assets. Staff have been very cognizant of tax rates and tax levy implications in the preparation of this budget, as staff are aware that the tax rates are what will determine levy changes to residents, landowners, and business owners. There are not only financial implications, but also service level and public trust implications. In these budget deliberations and discussions, council does need to keep in mind the commitments made for long-term debt financing, as well as the debt management policy targets for 2030. There were some challenges in putting the budget forward, including unknowns at this time and existing needs, and Aaron will give them to you in more detail. You will also note on the budget impacts and priorities summary sheet that the proposed budget includes a 0.25% increase on the levy relating to the asset management levy. And this 0.25% increase is consistent with previous years. The impacts on this current draft levy-based budget represent a 3.66% rural, that's Ward 1 and 3 tax rate increase, and a 5.32 urban, that's Ward 2 tax rate increase. Aaron will go into more detail to provide what that means for the average home assessed in South Huron. There are some unknowns at this time which impact both the operating and capital budgets, including allocations for the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly the gas tax grant, and insurance renewal information, which have not been received yet. There are some projects that have been deferred in order to meet the tax rate, and you will note markings identifying them in the footnotes of the budget. There are items that were submitted initially for the budget and then pushed further in the capital budget forecast as well. The summary also notes that growth estimates only have been included, so moving forward, any changes to those to growth will impact the tax rate increase required to meet the budget estimates. The final tax roll to be used for 2025 is not typically received until mid-December. The proposed total levy increase includes assessment growth, proposed tax rate increase, and increase in asset management levy. The budget impacts and priorities title page in this budget package provides a summary of both the annualized and one-time operating initiatives included in the 2025 operating budget, which impact the overall levy. The goal of this budget is to provide sustainability over the long term, include investment and renewal in municipal assets. Collaborations and partnerships continue to be very important. A well-managed budget process is foundational for sustainable community development and service delivery. As an update, I would also advise council that the OPP Policing 2025 annual billing statement package has been provided on your desks and uploaded on the agenda. Now I turn the floor over to Erin.
Thanks, Rebecca, and through you, Mayor Finch. If you can, please just make sure you're reviewing the budget impact and priority sheet that was sitting at your table and just shred the one that is in your binder, as there was a few last minute updates made to that. That would be appreciated. So I will just walk you through this initial impact and priority sheet. So the way that we build the budget is we start with the prior year, and then we make adjustments for any of the previous year one-time initiatives. That's the number at the top, the 71,315, followed by the wages and benefit increases for 2025. And note that this has been updated to include the COLA that was missing for the wages under governance. So this includes any of the grid step changes, position changes, and benefits, as well as 1.9% COLA. Following that, there's a few lines for changes just to kind of catch up with actuals for the last few years and right size the budget a bit. So there's just increasing revenue for the rebilling that occurs for the counselors that sit on county council. And that's just recognizing that that revenue has existed and we've just never put it formally into the budget. And then a few budget line fluctuations for things like utilities and IT, and just moving some lines around and adjustments to better reflect the actual spending. Next, there's a few lines related to fire services agreement. So first, there's the one with Blue Water where it's revenue for us. So that's adjusted for CPI each year. And then there's the new fire services agreement with Lambton Shores that we just signed, and that's going to be an increase to the budget. Next is the increase for transportation. This is an increase for the base for gravel and dust suppressant, and this is a 10% increase over the prior year. And we've been doing this for the last few. There's a few adjustments here that are user fee. These will not impact the levy, but just increasing the fines and penalties in the budget. Again, this is just to recognize revenue that we have been receiving for the last few years. Also an increase in the cost for repairs and sewers, finding just a general increase in expenses and wanting to increase that to better reflect. Next is another reflection of actual cost, additional fuel, safety, inspection costs that we see coming for rec in the next year, just an increase to repairs and maintenance. A few decreases and adjustments, some recognition of a cost that got taken on by the county, so can be removed from our budget, as well as now that the rec center and the Stephen debt have been set, just an adjustment to reflect the actual debenture costs that we have. Then there is the policing costs that Rebecca discussed. It was a rather large increase this year. This is a 17% increase over last year for our OPP costs. We've got the transportation costs for bridges and culverts. This is the OSAM report. This is an every other year expense that we see, so it gets put in. We have a new budget line based on a report brought to council previously for the private cemetery support. Some increases in contracted services. This is again to recognize some actual expenses that we've seen. This one is specifically for Port Blake, and it's just recognizing the actual cost. We like to look at a 3-year average and just increase based on that. Next is recognizing the investment income. So increasing again for investment income. This year, we're recommending using the 4-year average. And as you heard the auditor speak to, interest rates are now starting to drop and normalize. So we think using a more conservative approach than we have previously used. Next is the increase in user fees based on the new rates. This is an adjustment from what was in your file. This is one that we adjusted. So the total cost of increase of user fees is $212,500, but the levy impact is just $100,000 for that one. And that's for planning, some fire, recognizing Port Blake, the ice rentals, and some pool. Next is the 0.25% asset management levy that Rebecca spoke to. And then there's a few blanks here for items that are also unknown at this time. So we do not have the budgets from the conservation authorities, as well as we do not have the OMPF allocation for the year. And then there's just a few decreases here to budget. So adjusting the expected revenues for tax fines and penalties, we've decreased this based on the 3-year average, as well as removing some sales lines from the budget that we have not seen revenues for the last few years. So that summarizes the baseline impacts for operating. For the one-time initiatives for 2025, all of the one-time initiatives will not impact the levy. They are either carry forward projects or they are grant funded. So there's the modernization funds, and that's used to offset some software enhancements. And all of that is coming from reserves because we have a grant for that, as well as there will be some carry forward from the official plan and zoning bylaw, as well as the DC background study and the active transportation grant. So those are all partial carry forwards from 2024. And then finally, there's the baseline capital impact on the levy. So just an increase of what we're expecting from the levy for capital for 2025 of 200,515. And then that gives you the total increase of 473,841, then offset by the estimated growth that is put on the 2025 tax roll. So overall in total at the bottom, you'll see that that gives you the annual increase on $100,000 of residential assessment for rural wards 1 and 3 of $22.89 and urban ward 2 of $38.21. And then the annual increase on the average residential assessment of $285,001 of $65.29 for rural and $108.97 for urban. And then as Rebecca mentioned, the tax rate increase of 3.66% for rural wards 1 and 3 and 5.32% for urban ward 2. And that summarizes that. Is there any? And this is just a summary of what you will see in the documents going forward. So this overall summarizes what's happening in the budget. And then we've got that broken out in more detail in all of the departments going forward for operating. But any questions at this time?
Any questions at this time? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please. And then Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Aaron. Okay, I just wanted to have a couple of questions. The increased user fees in the old sheet we had until just a moment ago, we had a impact on levy of 212,500. And now the impact on the levy is 100,000. I'm not quite sure. Why did that change?
That was just sorry, through you, Mayor. That was just an oversight on my part of incorrectly including something as an impact on the levy that I shouldn't have. So it was the building inspection increase for user fees. So that shouldn't have gone on to the levy impact.
And why shouldn't it have gone on to the levy?
Because it's
impact?
not a levy impacted budget. So it is a fully balanced, the building department has to balance to zero and doesn't impact the levy. So it shouldn't have gone as a levy impact.
Thank you. Councillor Neep.
Just a question about the OMPF allocation. So last year, it says there's a dash there, and I'm assuming that it's included. Last year's amount is included, and then once we get the updated, then that will, if it's less or more, that's going to also impact the final tax rate.
Correct. Through you, Mayor. We always leave in what was there in the prior year, and this is just an incremental change that would go in here. So if we get more, then that will help, and then if we get less, then that will increase. Correct.
Great. Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks, Aaron. Great synopsis. Just a question on the tax levy tax roll, the 2025 tax roll, the negative 109,800. I know that I think you commented that closer to the final number isn't known until mid-December-ish. yeah, last year it was like negative 250,000. Any indication where it might shake out this year in versus, because that's like more than double last year. So just wondering how where that might end up.
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, excuse me. So the 109,800 that's referenced here is our initial estimates of municipal only tax rate due to the changes we've seen already happen this year. Excuse me. MPAC has provided a rough estimate of the anticipated new assessment for 2025. And there's a significant range between 107,000 to about 140. So until we get those final numbers, we can't say for certain, but this is a conservative estimate based on what I know to be true at this time.
Councillor, go ahead. Thank you.
So thank you. Just a follow-up. So that range that you're talking is in addition to this 109,
No.
or that is? So I guess my question is, say it's at the most 140. What's the difference? Why was it 250 last year? Is the building amount down, or MPAC is behind in processing things, or just wondering if they're keeping up with what we're submitting?
Certainly. Through you, Mayor Finch, MPAC is actually not behind. I would say they're right on schedule and right up to date with assessment. I would say that last year we saw a significant increase in assessment in part due to the completion of the bulk of the Buckingham Estates, as well as some of the South Point, where it's been slower this year to see that increased assessment just because the builds aren't selling. Marketability has changed and the assessment hits the roll at the time of occupancy. So if those buildings aren't selling, we're not catching the new assessment yet.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Vaughn and then Councillor Dietrich.
Just as a follow-up to what Councillor Oak was asking. So this figure of 109, it might go to 140, is just for growth. We also do get some money for renovations and things like that. Is that included in this figure?
That would be, through you, Mayor Finch, that would all be included in this figure as well.
That would all be
Yes.
included in this figure. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Dietrich, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Aaron, on that one there, it says adjustment to tax, fines, penalties, revenue based on a 3-year average. Can you explain that to me? Is that a cost or a revenue?
Through you, Mayor Finch, this is actually a decrease in a revenue line. So previously we had a revenue line of, I'm gonna say, I could probably say exactly. We had a revenue line and we just noticed that we were never actually reaching that amount of revenue. So this is just adjusting for actual. So previously this line was 185,100. You'll see it on page 4 when we start going through. And we've, in doing a 3-year average, we've never received 185,100 of fines and penalties for taxes. So we're decreasing what we estimate our revenue to be by 60,000 based on what we have been receiving for the last 3 years.
So this is all fines, but like if someone's in arrears or their taxes, is this calculated in that too?
Yes, this is that line. This is the line for fines and penalties for taxes.
Okay, any other questions before we move on? Oh, Councillor Vaughn, go ahead.
Yes. So back at budget basic time, we had 3 big pieces of government money that we didn't know anything about at that time. It looks like the OMPF allocation, we still don't know what that figure is for 2025. The gas tax is also still an unknown. Okay. And the OSIF, I think that was the check that Lisa Thompson brought to us. Do you have the number for that?
I do. through you, Mayor Finch, it'll be in capital, and I believe it was $1,005,014 potentially. If you just somewhere.
$1,005,014, you think?
I believe. It is not popping out at, $1,005,943.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Follow up? Nope. Any other questions? Councillor Oak.
No, the rest will come through as we go through the operating. Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Aaron, whenever you're ready.
I believe Rebecca's gonna start walking us through.
Let's we'll start with general government, page 4.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. It was noted by Rebecca that the community safety and well-being budget is being included now in general administration. Is that under the contracted services part, or where does it show up?
For you, Mayor Finch, it shows up under general admin in supplies. And you actually don't see it here because we also decreased the general supply budget by $10,000. So we did a general supply budget under general admin decrease of 10,000, and then we also brought in the community services and well-being, or community safety and well-being, sorry, budget in there. So unfortunately on here, you're not going to see it, but it has been moved. You can see it as a decrease under protection services.
Councillor Oak.
So under supplies, that 162,000 was dropped by 10,000, but then added 10,000 for community safety well-being. So that's what the budget is for that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Continue, please.
General administration. Whether there's any questions on that?
Questions at all? Okay, not seeing any?
Corporate services, there are some budget notes. I can read them out for council. Contracted services includes 32,819 for modernization strategies, offset by modernization grant. Wages and benefits include increased costs related to step increases, benefit cost increases, and COLA, offset by 1 FTE position shared with planning and gen admin, which was moved to recreation. Program support reflects share of corporate IT and administration support. Increased investment income was based on the 4-year average. General taxation levy increase by 470,245, including 27,428 required for the 0.25% increase for asset management levy. Overall levy increase funded partially by projected growth related levy dollars, estimated $109,800. Remaining increase funded via tax rate increase. Insurance costs are unknown at this time. And then it just notes OMPF allocation for 2025 is unknown.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Councillor Oak?
Yes, thank you. And Mayor, just wondering about insurance. We haven't included anything for insurance, haven't heard from or any indication from the insurance company. I noted in Andrew's presentation with the Lake Huron Water, he had 15% in his number. Any idea if what our total insurance is, and if it were to go up 10%, what that number might be? Because I expect it'll be a sizable increase again this year, but just wondering.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Through you, Mayor Finch. So the actual insurance for 2024 was $314,988. If our insurance goes up by 12% again over the 2024 actual, that would be another $37,800. We did reach out to insurance. We have been in touch with them. We did hear back today, and we heard back on two of our policies are looking significantly less than 12%, and they hadn't heard back on the other two yet. So we hesitate to put anything in here and hope that we will have some actual solid estimates to put in for the next meeting.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Councillor Dietrich, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Who dictates the amount of insurance that you have to have on a municipality? Like a farmer, I know a lot of them, they're not insuring half the stuff anymore. You can't afford it. Or either that or you got enough to cover it yourself, eh? Like, are we in that bracket at all, or how does that work?
Who'd like to take that?
Through the mayor, I'll start with that anyway. There's a whole process. We have to provide the insurer. Well, first off, we go and get an RFP. And that's done, I believe, every 5 years that we get an RFP for insurance. And then at that point, there's a lot of submissions as far as our facilities. We have our rolling stock, all our liabilities with our committees and council and all different types of insurance. And then they provide us a rate. Now with cyber insurance, that's a whole nother process. That's part of it as well, which is getting tougher and tougher to get. And it is something that at AMO and other conferences that municipalities are talking about. Well, insurance is always rising. And now with climate changes, different environmental changes, it is a question on how municipalities can continue to keep paying insurance. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Councillor Need, go ahead.
Apologies if I'm getting lost in the weeds with this, but through the mayor, the CAO, you mentioned liability with committees, and that would include council as well. What sorts of things for council would that cover, like lawyers' costs, say like the OLT, or like, I'm just curious. We've had, some files go to the OLT. So how is that covered? Those costs covered?
Through the mayor, those the insurance costs, I can maybe get a report back that would provide further information, but this is mostly for decision making. Decision making for boards and committees, and for committees as well, and volunteers. It's for, let's say, for the rodeo, if somebody has an accident, or if for accident insurance for council as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Rebecca, for that. I know at AMO, they're looking at some things. They even talked about some self-insurance, municipalities looking to self-insure some of their things. And I know a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now, maybe we increased our deductible to help reduce the insurance cost as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Okay. Ask staff to continue on.
Okay. If there's no more further questions for general government, we're going to move forward to health services.
Any questions? We're not seeing any. Okay. Oh, Councillor Oak, go ahead. You had something?
I guess, yes, thanks, Mayor. The private cemetery, it's in this category, that proposed private cemetery.
It is. It's the 15,000 is in this particular one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dietrich.
Since we're on that cemetery deal, how long is it going to be before we're going to have more people interested in municipality taking over the cemeteries?
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair. So at this point in time, in reaching out to the different privately run cemeteries, they weren't overly interested per se in having the municipality take over. However, they were looking for some sort of financial support. At this point in time, they do take great care and pride in running them themselves. But as costs increase, there may be inquiries that come forward. But at this point in time, staff are hopeful that by providing some form of financial assistance, may be able to keep the care and control with the private cemeteries for as long as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
So thank you. And so, Alex, for the cemeteries you've been talking to, do you feel that the 15,000 that we've put into the budget for this coming year is sufficient to address the need that you're hearing?
Through the chair, so different cemeteries were looking for different amounts depending on who you're speaking with. Some were looking ranging between $2,000 to $8,000. This is just the pilot project to get this off the ground. So this was a proposal in front of council. Council could always choose to increase or decrease going forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving right along. Oh, Councillor Oak, go ahead.
So if when we approve this budget, unless we've made adjustments, there's 15,000 that will be going into the pilot, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, Sue Colson.
And through the mayor, there's also to be the policy coming back to council as well.
Okay, anything further on health services?
I can read the budget notes.
Yep. Okay.
One FTE position shared with planning and general admin moved to recreation. Budget between contracted services and repairs and maintenance realigned to better reflect the spending. Investment income increased based on a 4-year average. Wages and benefits include increased costs related to step increases, benefit cost increases, and cost of living. Program support reflects share of corporate IT and administrative support, and insurance costs are unknown at this time.
Okay, thank you. We're on planning and development now. Okay, go ahead. Any questions regards planning and development? Seeing any? Move on to protection services. We have no questions there. Okay. Any questions on the protection services? Councillor Oak?
Yeah, so on page 8 of 114, is that what you're on, Mayor? Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
yes.
Just under policing, the training and conferences budget of 9807, same as last year. I guess question is that still needed now that there isn't a local police services board?
I'll start this out, and if Deputy Mayor wants to finish it up, he can add. We kept it the same because at this time, the detachment board has just got enough members now to actually meet. So there'll be, I believe, this week and within the next month, setting a budget. And at that time, this can be adjusted, but for now, we left it status quo.
Okay, Deputy, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, as of right now, we're meeting on the 30th and we're supposed to go over our budget, but I doubt very much it'll be set. So yeah, we'll have to see from there, but I think we should be all right here, but I'm not so sure because it was a bunch of other ones didn't have a budget at all. So we'll see where it goes from there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sue Colson.
And through the mayor, just for clarification, the detachment board will set a budget and that will be divided between all 9 municipalities. Not sure yet how it will be, whether it's equally per household or percentage point. However, so that's why we kept the amount we have now until we know the final numbers.
Very well. Okay, Councillor Oak.
Thank you. And obviously the police OPP contract up 331,900. and thank you for providing some of the details here. Is there anything verbally you'd CEO maybe could provide as far as some of the rationale behind the increase?
My understanding was that there was a wage freeze for 3 years, and this is a catch up from that. I'm not sure at this point whether or not it was all retroactive this year or whether it'll be phased in for the next couple of years. There was scheduled to be an OPP. Usually they have the update and explain the budget, but it was canceled and hasn't been rescheduled. Aaron and I will attend when it's rescheduled, and I could have maybe more information at that time.
Okay, any other questions? Councilor Oak?
So in light of that number, which is a big number, I think Aaron mentioned 17% increase, I think. So has there been any work done or looked at potentially using the OPP stabilization reserve to help cushion some of the blow here? Just wondering.
Through the mayor, that's an option of council, of course, but I'm hoping that Aaron and I will have more information onto seeing before the next budget meeting as to whether this is a one-time large increase or whether it'll be increasing. That might give council a better idea of how they want to strategize using that reserve.
Okay, Councilor Oak?
Thanks. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. I just wondering if we were to use some of the reserve, there will be an adjustment as well to what the tax rate would be in the rural and the urban based on the 55-45 calculation. Maybe somebody could just explain that, how that works, because this year, because of this significant increase, it's reversed the tax rate. The urban is higher than the rural this year versus the last couple years. It's been the other way around. This is reverted back to where it was previous to the last couple years. So just could somebody maybe explain just that 55-45 split?
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Finch. So yes, you're correct. We take the the whole police budget, so the police contract plus the police services board, it's the whole budget, and then it gets split 55% to urban, 45% to rural, based on an agreement through amalgamation. And that is, you're exactly correct. What is flipped the increase so that the increase is higher urban this year than it is rural, which is not what you've seen previously, as the last 2 years have seen a decrease in the policing costs instead of the increase. So yes, it would adjust that. We would take it because that would decrease that budget and we would take it directly from there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on protective services? Okay, not seeing any. Right along. You have anything?
So that was policing. Is there any questions for fire services?
Councilor Oak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just on user fee charges, we're projecting a $20,000 increase in revenues for fire, over and above the. I guess I'm just wondering what that 20,000 is. As far as, is it part of the user fee study that we did? No. Okay, no.
Chief Becker? Welcome. Welcome.
Through you, Mayor Finch, the user fees is billable calls. So you've seen an uptick in motor vehicle collisions where we're recouping our costs, and every year the actual MTO rate increases. So that's where that's coming from.
And Chief, are you noticing an increase in crashes at intersections, or where are they? Are they something that can be engineered, or is it just people going too fast?
Speed's the biggest thing, but the intersections has always been a problem. And as some of you are aware, the mayor and myself have been in contact with the county and working on some improvements to some of our county road intersections with larger stop signs and other reflectors actually on the poles to identify them.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Vaughn?
So just following on through that whole conversation, up to October 17th, we've got about $83,000 in user fees. So budget for next year is 44,000, little more than half. Is that 83,000? Was that a sort of normal year to be expected, or do we think things will get better?
Through the mayor, always hopeful things will get better. It has been a busy year with motor vehicle collisions. Again, it's an unknown, so I think that's a safe place to put it for this time.
Any other
Sorry.
questions for the chief?
Through you, Mayor, just to follow up on that, again, we'll have used the 3-year average to come up with the increase there. Instead of just reflecting what happened recently, we look at a 3-year average of actuals and then put in the numbers based on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the chief at this time? Okay, thanks, chief. Thank your staff for their service, the fire department. Anything further? Moving on. Ms. Sue Carlson, what's our next item there?
Next item will be building inspection services.
Questions in regards to that? Okay, not seeing any. Bylaw enforcement. Not seeing any there. Conservation authorities. Okay. With Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. So we haven't put any increases yet, or I assume it'll be increases from the conservation authorities. I noted the Upper Thames one was, they had a draft budget there in our last council package. And so I didn't know if we had put that in as of yet, or we haven't included ABC or Upper Thames yet.
Through you, Mayor, we haven't heard anything official yet, so we haven't put anything in, but hopefully we will have information to include in the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on. Past that into recreation and cultural services, I believe. Any questions in regards to that?
We'll start with recreation general.
We're on page 11 of 114. Go ahead, Councillor Oak.
Yes, thank you. The external transfers, the 40,000, that's Kirkton Pool and Hall. Has there been any discussion with Per South on, I know we talked about the capital side, but this is operating with utilities going up and labor going up. Just wondered if there'd been any advice from them on this.
Through the mayor, the CAO and I have been in discussions, and at this time, they haven't provided any numbers for either operating or capital.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further on recreation. We'll go to parks, 510. Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yes, on the parks, active, passive, the user fee charges, so far to October 17th this year, we've 116,000. Is that revenue all for coming from Port Blake?
Who can take that? Aaron?
Through you, Mayor, I would have to confirm that. I would say the majority of it would definitely be Port Blake. There may be some other in there as well, but I can get back to you to confirm for sure what the breakdown is. Yep, Elliott Park would also be in there.
Oh, Elliott Park would be in there too.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Oak?
Just in addition to that, on that line item, so the 88,000 that's being projected, that's a 3-year average as well.
Yes, through you, Mayor, that is the 3-year average. And yes, we we likely will see that continue to increase, but as this is the first year with the changes to Port Blake, we're seeing it start to increase. But just wanted to confirm first and kind of slowly increase instead of doing a giant jump each year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Counselor Dietrich, go ahead.
So did this number here, 116,000 cover expenses?
Through you, Mayor. Based on what we're seeing here, it has not covered expenses, but these are also just until October without any of the final year, without any of our final entries put in or anything. So at this time, it has not, but that could still change as we continue to finalize our expenses for the year.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on under 510? We'll move on to the next item, 520. Nothing there. Going to the pools. Counselor Oak.
Just under programs, just to clarify, the revenue and expense item under the 51,000 budget under programs and the contracted services 31,000. Are both of those line items the rodeo?
Through you, Mayor. Yes, those are the rodeo.
Thank you. Okay, next item, facilities.
Sorry, through you, Mayor, just to follow up on that, there will also be karate in there. That won't be in that revenue number. That would come under the user fee and charges, but in contracted services, we will have some expenses related to karate as well.
Okay, thank you. So we're at facilities at this point. Nothing there. There's nothing on facilities. Move on to transportation services. Any questions under transportation services, roads general? Bridges and culverts? Paved roads? Counselor Dietrich, you had something?
When we do paved roads, who decides the type of material or the thickness of the pavement or whatever? Who looks after that?
Who'd like to take that? Mr. Timmermans, welcome.
Through the mayor, that's generally done. The SOI study also states the thickness. And it's kind of just a general practice of the thickness that the municipalities are going for. So we pretty well, if we're just doing one coat, we want no less than 50 on a rural road. Otherwise, it doesn't stand up towards the traffic and heavy equipment.
Well, I mentioned that because from Crediton Road to Huron Park, did you notice how that strip of pavement went in as it's a darker color, but it's not very even. It's not as smooth as when Lavis was doing it or whatever.
You're talking on airport line?
Right.
So airport line, credit.
Like where it goes into Huron Park there.
Yeah, go ahead. Shane.
Through the mayor, so that's a county section,
Right.
that road. And what they did there, that's a micro seal that they put on. They also did that in multiple other locations, and they're trying to see if they can get more longevity out of their roads.
Okay, I thought maybe it was the new owner, not Lavis, but that's a county project anyway, not one of ours. No, okay, thank you.
And that, sorry, Shane, before you go, that county road would end at the trailer factory, that corner, or where does it end?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and then Huron Park Road is a municipal road, correct? The one that leads over to Highway 50, yeah. There's been some discussion about that in the past, there's some confusion. Go ahead, Councilor.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll get talking a little bit more on when we talk capital, but on the paved roads, because of the downtown or Main Street being under construction right at the moment. Airport and Morrison are taking a bit of a beating with the traffic on them right at the moment. Any thoughts, or has there been any traffic counts on those roads to see how much they've increased and whether that'll change the longevity of those roads?
Through the mayor. So usually if there's a project like that, the traffic's very short. Like we're looking at, 7 months of the high influx. So yes, it does do an impact, but not enough to make over high future years. There is an impact, but not, it's very slow. Now, if it was multi-year, then yeah, you're going to have impact. And you're correct. Yes, Morrison and Airport have seen up substantial more traffic. Yeah, it's something to look into, and probably a year from now, 2 years from now, that it might be something that may have to be bumped. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I have, lots of cars, but it's noticeable that both of them have a lot of truck traffic on them that are avoiding the Highway 4 right at the moment. So, anyways.
And Shane, while you're there, don't want to put you on the spot. Would you know how many kilometers of road we actually have in South Huron? I understand it was like 350 at one time. Is that correct? Or do you remember?
Yep, that's correct.
And would you know that
181 gravel. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the asphalt.
Yep, no problem. And I remember one time they talked about spans, 3-meter spans. These I understand there were 77 of those culverts and spans in the municipality. Is that correct? What do you recall? I don't want.
It's 77, but it might be a touch more or a touch under, but yeah, that's really close.
Yeah, just to give context, that the amount of infrastructure we actually have just in roads and bridges, but I thought it was an interesting stat when actually Don had brought it up last year. So thanks very much for having that tip of your tongue there. Anything further? Councillor Oak?
Just before Shane takes off, the next category, just on unpaved roads, we're projecting an increase for gravel and dust suppressant. Again, another 10%. I noted that some of our neighboring municipalities and the county are going to like 3-year tenders as opposed to year by year. Just wondering if that might be something that we should be exploring, because you might, anyways, there might be some savings by doing a larger commitment like that with some of these suppliers. I'm not sure if that's been looked at.
Through the chair, yes, that's something that can be looked at when we tender this year. I've heard two sides. During COVID, it didn't work out very good at all. It kind of came back. I have heard in the last 2 years, year and a half, that ones that did that, there was a little bit of an increase, but it was fairly decent. The gravel market's starting to level out a little bit more. I'm hoping this 10% increase is going to get us up to the tonnage that we should be at, and hopefully then we can be up there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been brought to my attention, and I've sort of noticed it as I've been traveling as well on the gravel roads. The dust suppressant it's only lasting like about half the summer nowadays. Just wondering, have we cut back on what's going on the roads, or the product is significantly changed in the last couple of years? But by the middle of the summer, it's just basically there's dust everywhere and it's not working. So just wondering what the thoughts are there.
Through the mayor. So the dust suppressant hasn't changed. The quantities has not changed. It's always been the same. There has been a few roads that have actually got additional flake tonnage. This fall has been really dry. Like, I think we've had 14 millimeters of rain in the month of October. The summer was fairly dry too. The dust control needs moisture every once in a while to help bind it back in. that really does help. We also do sample periodically, sample the dust control to make sure that it's at its right percentage.
Thank you. Deputy, do you have something?
Yeah, there was, is there any thoughts of going a little wider on our pavement when we're paving? Because we all know this equipment's getting bigger and most of it runs on the edge now. When you meet something, it runs on the edge of that pavement to break it off. Just wondering if there was any thoughts to maybe looking at a little wider, or what the cost would be per kilometer, or just something to look at. Thank you.
Shane, comment at all? Okay, thank you. And thanks very much, Shane, for that. Any other questions while we're on roads? And we have Mr. Timmons at our disposal. Councillor Dietrich?
You're talking about the dust control. If you grade that road, you're gonna lose some of it, are you not? I don't mind a little dust when I'm taking beans over on the Kirkton Road there, so keep grading, never mind the dust.
Thank you for that. Anything further? Okay, let's move on. I guess we're into traffic operations and roadside. Any questions in regards to that? Municipal drains. Okay, street lighting. Councillor Oak?
Just wondered if, thank you, Mayor, wonder if we could explain the drop in the budget for the street lighting taxation levy, 40,000.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Through you, Mayor, there was capital projects last year. So for special area rate, we have to add it to that tax levy. And then so those were capital projects last year. So the levy was raised for that and then back down again for this year to balance.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, winter control. And stormwater management. Okay. We'll move on to environmental services. Anything further? Mr. Sue Colson, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to environmental services. We're at the water division at this point. Yeah. And, oh, go ahead, Councillor Oak.
Yeah, in environmental services, water division, the contracted services. I know last year we had the master plan in there for 2024. Now, is there something special in for 2025 that the budget is still staying up there as far as the 200, over the 200,000?
Who'd like to take that? Aaron?
Through you, Mayor. No, I believe that it's decreased by the master plan cost, and then there'll be additional small change just for the asset management allocation is why it won't be exactly that. But yeah, I believe that's been removed, and so there's no one-time projects for this year.
I just didn't know the year to date's 124,000, so I just wondered whether that how much more there is to come in for this year as far as expenses.
Through you, Mayor, I believe it is for the water that we purchase and we'll be 2 months behind in that likely. So there's likely, it looks like these are the costs to October, but it will really just be to August and then a few more extra months of that.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to South Huron Sewers. Page 18. Any questions regards to that? Okay, we'll move on to solid waste. Very well. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. Solid waste, we talked about that there had been a deficit reserve. And I'm just wondering, there talk about that we were going to try to correct that deficit or get it back eventually here. Just wondering, has that been built into the budget where we're it was $175,000 deficit, so just wondering if it's been captured here.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Finch. So you will see that there's a transfer to reserve this year and not a transfer from reserve for solid waste. So that will help offset it. And then I will let Mr. Giberson continue.
Welcome, Mr. Giverson. See you when you're ready.
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. In answer to the question, the reversing of the reserve being in a deficit is now projected in 2025 to be completely back in the positive.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Giverson. Any other questions on solid waste? Okay, not seeing any. Very good. Okay, we'll move on to the body of the reports here, and Mr. Sewell Carlson, go ahead, please.
Now we're if there aren't any more questions on the operating budget, then we can start the capital review.
Okay, we've got time, so. Okay, very good. Turn it over to staff.
So there is nothing in the capital for administration and building services proposed for this upcoming year. I didn't know if council had any questions on anything in the capital forecast for either of those two divisions.
Any questions from council? Okay, not seeing any. Go ahead, Ms. Sewell Carlson.
The next one would be emergency services, and that would be the fire chief. You can lead us through.
And welcome, Chief Becker, again.
Thank you, Mayor Finch. First project under fire services is the third and final year of the fire hose replacement. And this is our 2.5-inch tack and supply lines. This was also to be noted that it was deferred last year.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay. Not seeing any.
Project number 2 is our annual PPE replacement. This coming year sees 6 sets of PPE replacements at the Exeter station based on age. This is the bunker gear, helmets, hoods, gloves, and boots. All has a lifespan of 10 years under the NFPA guidelines.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. Jeremy, just last year we did 14, this year 6. And then last year we had the same amount for the next 10 years sort of thing in there. This year we're not putting it in the budget for the future years. It's not in the 2026, 27 all the way across, and just wondering whether we should be projecting that.
That is a good catch. Yes, there will be bunker gear in those years. I think that was just missed probably on my part.
Okay, so
No problem.
that's and that it doesn't,
And
that
if
this
it-
is all we're doing for
Yep.
2025 anyways.
It does fluctuate based on the number of suits that expire or are damaged beyond replacement every year though. So this year, coming year, we see 6 sets. Last year, we also had a 8-member increase. So that's why we had the numbers last year to fill those vacancies.
Great, thank you. On to the next item.
Item number 3 calls for the diesel generator at the Exeter station. This diesel generator is probably well past the 40 years old. It was originally at the downtown Exeter fire station and then moved to this station. It is also located inside the station, which poses problems with diesel exhaust and the meeting room. It's right in behind there, and I can hear it in my office when it's running. And it's also not a automatic starting one. So in the middle of the night, in order to do anything, you have to fire up the generator, and it's quite a cumbersome task to find your way in there, first of all, and then to do that But the other notable thing is the diesel tank outside is past its lifetime and can no longer be full or filled, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions? Number 4.
Excuse me, number 4 calls for the replacement of the fire station in Dashwood. I don't know how detailed in depth we need. I think we all are aware of why we're doing that.
Certainly been lots of conversation on it, but are there any questions at this time? Councillor Vaughn.
Yeah, the only thing I had a question on was that one sentence in here that talks about this Dashwood station also being a emergency, the backup for our emergency operations center. And it may have been mentioned before, but I don't remember that from before.
So previously, the backup emergency operations center was the Huron Park Fire Station. And since then it was moved out of there. First of all, it was moved to the fire station in Exeter, and then it was now moved to the community center. It's in the basement of Dashwood for the temporary time being. There is no, there's limited resources there in that building, but going forward, when we design the training room in the new fire station, it would be set up for an backup emergency operations center. So you'd have internet, phone lines, everything that you need for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. The funding sources for this, you know, it's unknown right at the moment because we're a long ways off from that. But what's being proposed here is the fire capital replacement reserve. Now, I did note, and now there might be some money that hasn't been put in, but what we're proposing here is bigger than what's in there right at the moment. Because the balance is showing that it's going to be like 1.2 million at the end of December. Because we used the bunch for the fire truck this year that came out of that reserve. So just wondering if unless there's some money that's going in that we hasn't been recorded.
Through you, Mayor Finch, there is 315,000 going from the working fund capital this year into the reserve. So there's that as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything further on item 4? Councillor Oak.
I guess I'm just, yeah, I just don't know that we want to use up all our fire capital replacement reserve for the station, and whether, I guess when it comes to the number, we can figure that out at a later discussion, but I'm just thinking that we might, you know, it might still work out that that might be the debt level, and if the price comes in less, we won't need as much out of the, but I just don't think it's a good idea to drain our fire replacement reserve for a building. It's not rolling stock where we're revolving all the time. I think when we finance or when we do buildings, they should be financed properly for 20 or 25 years to not 40 years. I'm not suggesting that, but I think it should be financed as a long-term asset and leave the rolling stock to work through the working capital fund or the revolving type of scenario. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vaughn.
Thank you. Okay, the DC charges for reserves have about $95,000 in there. And so I'm just wondering if there's any of those monies in the development charges that also can be used for this project.
Staff, who would like to take that? Special call.
To the mayor, I can start with that. This project was not included in the DC study before. We are doing a DC study right now. And it is for growth. Development charges are for growth. So that is one of the things that we're looking into for this new study as to whether it's whether it's same for same replacement or whether there will be an element of growth. So at this time, there is not a number and it's not in the existing DC charges, but we are looking at that right now.
As looking at that in terms of potential, there is a potential.
Whether there's a potential, yeah, that's something that we would ask our consultant.
Okay, so a
whether-
lot of things have to happen, like we've got to get it into the new development charges study, because there is growth we're expecting in sort of the west end of South Huron,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, there's some in Crediton, there's some along the lake and,
But right now, it's not included in our existing DC
Right.
charges.
okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on item 4? Councillor Neep, go ahead.
Yeah, in August, we had met with Infrastructure Ontario to discuss the sale of the Huron Park Fire Station as well. And I think it's my only question is if that sale does go forward and we are able to get those funds, if Infrastructure Ontario allows us to do that, where would that money go? Would that go into the reserve, or would it be specifically earmarked for the Dashwood Fire Station? Because that was something we did discuss during our delegation. I'm not sure.
Ms. Sue-Colson?
Through the mayor, the process is long. I just got another email from Infrastructure Ontario. I haven't received any feedback yet, just to give you guys a bit of a background on our request to see whether or not we can keep the funds from the sale. So haven't heard an answer from that piece. But at the end of the day, it'll be a council decision where the proceeds of that sale go.
Great, thank you. Anything further on item 4? Councillor Vaughn?
I know we have a lot more to talk about with the fire station for Dashwood, but also wondering in terms of grants with FCM, are we looking at that at all in terms of with this whole process?
Yes, so right now we're in the early stages, trying to get a solid number of what it's going to cost, and then we're going to be looking at other options as well.
Thank you. Anything further on item 4? Not seeing any. Okay, item number 5 then.
Item number 5 calls for the purchase and installation of air purification units inside both fire stations. This is to assist with the removal of the carcinogens and harmful toxins that are known to cause cancer.
Questions in regards to that? Okay, not seeing any. Item number 6.
Item number 6 is a gear extractor and gear dryer. These items were applied for under a OFM grant this year, which we're due to hear back very soon. This will allow a gear dryer and a gear extractor in both stations for immediate washing of the bunker gear. We're moving into the days of where it needs to be washed immediately after, and I can advise you that the structure fire that we had in town here on the weekend, we've had several sets go through the unit here that we have in town. So we're using one gear extractor here in Exeter for both stations.
And prior to this, how are you getting the gear washed?
Not correctly.
Yeah, so any questions? Moving on, number 7, or, I'm sorry, somebody had a question. Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Okay, just one question about that. So if we, in proceeding with purchasing this washer and dryer, do we have a place in Dashwood to actually put the equipment?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Chief. Sorry, Deputy, go ahead.
Sorry, but I presume this can be moved to the the new station.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Now, on to the next one, Councillor Oak.
You're not getting away that easy. Just, I know we're talking 2025, but there's some 26 and 27 numbers that are, we got to start planning for the future, and just wondered if you could comment even just on the 26 numbers there, because the breathing apparatus replacement, just $500,000. Just wondering how many, or what is the
So
You're looking at
the 2025 breathing apparatus replacement. So this is the air packs that firefighters wear in dangerous situations. Anything with smoke, hazardous scenes, anything like that. So it's the tank on your back with a mask on your face, basically. But the current apparatus that we have, I'm going to be guessing, but it was Chief Morgan that replaced that, so that could give you guys an idea of how old this stuff is. But it is becoming harder and harder to get parts for this stuff, and it is going to be outdated by 2027, and no parts will be available. So,
Thank you for that, Chief. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks again, Chief. Next item. Under the carry forward cemetery fence project. Any questions in regards to that?
So through the chair, the first item was the 2023 carry forward. So that's phase one of the cemetery fence project along Highway 83. And the contract was awarded to Sharps Creek Forge in August. And the contractors advised that the finials, the little fancy toppers that go on each of the posts and the spindles, sorry, they are currently the ones that they're looking at are out of stock. So they're looking at a 2025 construction.
Thank you. Any questions in regards to the cemetery fence? Not, Councillor, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Alex, for the update. Is there any talk about the next phase at all?
Through the chair, so at this point in time, the foundation who's been doing the fundraising had come to council previous term asking to proceed with phases. I do know they were also looking at maybe they're doing more fundraising for the second phase. And also they're kind of keeping an eye on the possible roundabout construction. So trying to time that with their second phase as well.
Thank you. Okay, nothing further on the cemetery fence, Councillor Vaughn.
Yes, on the in the reserve funds graphs that we were given in the budget basics, it has the Exeter Cemetery fence project, but it has no money in there. And I'm sure I've seen that somewhere in reserves before. So I'm just trying to validate that we actually have that 138,000 sitting in reserve somewhere.
Aaron, do you want to take that?
Through you, Mayor Finch, I agree. I'm seeing it not there. It's likely that it got dropped off because it was a 2024 expense that we thought was going to be cleared out at the end of 2024. So it would have been in there as a balance and then moved into revenue as it was used. So I will double check this and see what happened, but I can confirm it's there.
Councillor Oak?
No, it's there. It's on the first page, Exeter Cemetery fence, the first page in the first block at the bottom. It shows that there's an estimate. So there's like at the end of the year, there's going to be $500 left or whatever. But it is there. It's just not in that second page anymore. It got put into this. I'm not sure the difference between page 1 and page 2 when it comes to the reserves, but it's showing there.
Thank you. Yeah, through the mayor, I see that now, Councillor Oak. And yeah, so it is on the first page. So those are reserves, but they're not deferred revenue is the difference between the two sections there. But yes, I do see it there now and showing that it will be spent in 2024, which it will be carried forward for next year instead.
Great. Any more questions on
thank you.
cemetery fence? Okay, not seeing any, so move on to cemetery 01. The gator.
This project calls for the replacement of the gator that's used at the cemetery. This unit's believed that it's 14 years old. This unit's also used daily by staff for maintenance, interments and cleanup. And it has become problematic and has spent a considerable amount of time at the local dealership for repairs.
Thank you, Chief. And even the picture shows the front left tire on an angle compared to the other right tire. So, any questions? Very long. Number 2. Any questions in regards to? Well, go ahead, Councilor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just the columbarium there, the reserve, I think we're using the reserve there. Is that then use that reserve completely up? Does that finish that reserve off?
Madam Clerk?
So through the chair, there are some of the reserves are being used for current cemetery, landscape plan that was in this year's budget. What was approved and what, it appears the cost coming in, there may be some additional funds left over. But currently that we have it set out on this, that we would be using the full amount currently showing that would be available in 2025 from the reserve to cover the cost of the columbarium.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on the columbarium? So, not seeing any. Okay, move on to community services. 1. Welcome, Amanda. Any questions in regards to the ball diamond lights? Oh, Councilor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mayor. This is the project that we've applied for 2 different grants for right at the moment. Just question, if the grant doesn't come through in both cases, are we still moving forward with this project, or what is the thoughts?
Go ahead.
Through the mayor, so that is the hope that we still continue on doing this project. So an average lifespan of the antenna style poles, or standards is what they call them, is 20 to 25 years. It's estimated these are well over 25 years old. So there is a need in that regard, as well as the lean of them currently. Not all of them, but there are some currently leaning. So there's a safety concern as well.
And we have to recall too that the backdrop was actually collapsed in the snow last year or 2 years ago, was it not, Chief? So they had to be replaced. So risk management. Any questions, Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, sometimes grants are, you're eligible for grants if you haven't actually started a project. So just from a timing perspective, I'm not exactly sure when the deadlines are on these grants, like the Blue Jays one or the Jays one. Seems to be we're doing an intention kind of letter first, and then January something else is going to happen. And so I'm just trying to think in terms of, are we cognizant of the fact that we don't want a chicken and egg scenario here where we're actually starting work and we're hurting our availability to get a grant?
Yeah, so through the mayor, so those the timelines have been taken into consideration. You are right with the Jays Care. It is an expression of interest. We will be hearing back if we move to the second round in January. At that point, they said it should take 2 to 3 months to hear from them. So February, March. In regards to the first grant we applied for, we should be hearing by the end of April, I believe. So it should time up pretty well, provided we're successful in both. You can't start any part of it. So you know, the goal is to start before the season, but just knowing lead times on some of the materials, realistically, it's probably going to end up being in September, provided the polls stay where they are. So we're not looking at a conflict of time as of right now, and provided the polls stay still, that should be fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to community services 6. Any questions? Not seeing any. Can we move on to 2021 carry forward? Fort Blake? Any questions? Councillor Vaughn?
Yes, so most of the proposed work for 2025 seems to be upgrades to the washrooms, including a new accessible cement pad and repairs as required. So I know that in the summertime, I think it was, that Julie Sawchuk came out and did sort of a audit on AODA and that park. And I know that around the washrooms and the pad around the washrooms, things are looking a little bit rough. But it seemed to me that just having been out in Port Blake with her at the time we were doing that walk around, there were other items that also were a challenge for particularly for somebody in a wheelchair in terms of trying to get from the parking lot to the washroom or parking lot to the pavilion or parking lot to the sun deck. So I'm just asking the question is for this next year coming, is it only the accessible cement pad? Were there other items for future consideration that are AODA?
Yes, so through the mayor, so sorry about that. We were actually recently out there to look at the cement pad and see what work can be completed and started. But you are right with Julie's assessments. It's great to have an accessible washroom or pavilion or sun deck, but it's not accessible if you can't get there, right? So from the parking lot, like you were saying. So in the hopes of next year, creating those pathways to make it fully accessible for those folks is definitely on the radar to do as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any further questions, Councilor Oak?
And I believe there's been some work that the transportation group is doing back there as well.
So through the mayor, so our hopes is our friends in transportation can help us remove that current pad that's not accessible. There's that lip into the washroom. So that is what we did meet out there. I believe it was last week or the week before to discuss.
Great, thank you. Moving along. Next item, the Dashwood Community Center playground equipment carry forward from 2022. Go ahead. Any questions? 2023 carry forward for the Kirkton Pool accessibility upgrades. Any questions? Oh, Councilor Fawn?
Did we get past the Dashwood one?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
asked, yes.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was
I figured
writing some notes from Port Blake, so I just sorry. Just wanted to know with the Dashwood playground equipment where we might be. The last time we met as a committee, we were challenged with some of the placement of service providers, hydro, that kind of thing. And so I'm wanting to know, where are we with that challenge? Are we going to be ready to go in the spring?
So through the worship, so you are correct. The last time we met, there was a thought to put the playground next to the pavilion. There's utilities underneath there. They kind of wrap around in a way that doesn't really allow for us to have a good size footprint of a playground there. So we're exploring what it might cost to move those utilities. So that's hopefully coming back to the next meeting. The other proposed two areas is one across the creek and then one on the side of the creek that's closest to the community center. There are some concerns about having them at both locations. So as a group, I think we do need to sit down and kind of weigh the pros and cons and kind of decide on a location moving forward. So we're kind of at a bit of a standstill right now. We're going to look at the utility cost to see what it would take, if it's even possible, to move those next to the pavilion too.
Okay, great, thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Vaughn.
Yeah, so you mentioned a future sit down kind of meeting to talk about some options. And I wasn't sure if you meant the next meeting being a budget meeting that we're going to talk about this again, or is it a committee meeting, or what are we actually, what are you
Yep. So
suggesting?
my apologies. So that I was referencing, sorry, the committee meeting, sitting down and kind of finalizing what location they want to move forward with, because there's some back and forth on the 3 different locations. So that was going to be a discussion taken back to the Dashwood committee to decide on the location. And then once we can decide on the location, we should have a better sense of what the costs are. Because I know we have held, I believe it's 81,000. So once we decide on a location, if we're going to have to move utilities or we're going to have to ensure that it's accessible across the creek, that may change that number a bit. And we can see what we can work with that 81,000 too.
Go ahead.
Okay, just So before we go to the committee, because we've had so many discussions at the committee level, are we going to have those costs of moving the utility in hand ahead of time? Because there's costs also if you were going to be on one side of the creek or the other side of the creek, and then we bring back in the whole issue of accessibility, which it's not accessible right now. That's major cost too. Will we have all of those different costs so we can have a discussion that actually makes some sense?
Fair enough. Through the worship. So my goal is to get the costs for the to move the utilities if it is a possibility, and then I'd have to review the previous notes to kind of see what the costs were to putting it where it currently is or putting it in the new location. So I can make sure I have those costs ready for the next meeting, so we can have a fruitful discussion on where we want to go and how to move forward.
Okay, just to add to that, I don't think we ever had costs for one side of the creek or the other. All we had was really an audit from Julie and the AODA saying virtually impossible. It is, you know, in her view, to do that. Yeah, I'm just concerned about going back to the committee with too many options for where are we going to put this playground. And I'm also concerned that at this point with the budget, hoping to get this playground for next year, whether it's costs by the creek or it's costs on the patch next to the pavilion, there's nothing in this budget that talks about costs at all. And so I'm worried about going forward with this budget with nothing, knowing there's going to be costs no matter which way we go. It's just telling me if we don't have that in the budget, are we even going to do anything for next year? Which just gets more and more expensive with every year we delay. So that's not necessarily something for you, Amanda, but I'm just thinking before we get past this budget piece, we've got to be thinking about what are we actually going to do for costs.
Okay, Councillor Oak.
I guess just a clarification, this has already been approved in the budget before. We're just carried forward this project. So it's not new, not a new request.
The playground equipment is what has been approved in previous years. It was not, it was a surprise, let's put it this way. Last year when we found out that where the patch of land we wanted to put this on, most accessible, had an issue with utilities being underneath the ground. And so there might be a cost for rerouting those utilities. Those costs were never even envisioned in previous years. So to go forward with any kind of equipment, we need to have some kind of cost, or we need to decide we're not going to go forward with these playground equipment in Dashwood.
Ms. Masood-Coulson.
The other option maybe that the committee could think about too is there are a lot of different types of playground equipment, or that the committee itself, if councils, both Blue Water and Municipality of South Huron, decide that that's the top amount to be spent, then that could be something that could go back to the committee and say, for whatever solution the committee is going to recommend, this is the top of the budget. It could be, and could be whatever. There are a lot of different types of playground equipment. They're not necessarily always just the same form of structure. So it might not need to be same for same, and could be a committee discussion point as well.
Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that in between this meeting and the next meeting, the wind turbine committee or the amenity fee committee is meeting. This might be something that we can discuss as well at that meeting as part of the committee of some of the projects that we're potentially maybe looking at too. So might be something that we consider as well as that committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Neep.
Thank you. Through the chair, like when we do find out some of these potential costs, I mean, it is possible for us to do a budget amendment at that point. And I think given the timeliness of how we, it has been put off. It's a carry forward project. I think, it'd be worth looking at making a budget amendment to make sure something does move forward, because again, it would be nice for the residents in Dashwood to have accessible playground equipment. So.
Absolutely. Good. Any other comments? Very good. Moving right along. We just talked about the Kirkton Pool accessibility upgrades. Any questions, Councillor Oak?
I think the CAO's maybe got an update from Perth South.
They are on track to complete it this year. They're still waiting for some of the supplies.
Thank you. Any other questions? Moving on to the community services Gator. Any questions on that? Okay, moving on to the community services 04 Dodge Ram 1500 replacement pickup truck. Okay. No. Who calls it? Oh,
Yeah.
does anybody want to continue on? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I want to go back a minute to the recreation for Port Blake for the John Deere Gator. So I think that was one project to go. When I'm looking at possible sources of funding, I'm seeing $20,000 coming from the Port Blake Revitalization Fund, and I'm just wondering what fund that is.
Aaron, do you want to take that?
Review, Mayor. I believe the thought was it was coming from the funding that is in the carry forward for Port Blake. So this could be part of that Port Blake revitalization project.
Councillor Vaughn?
Okay, so that was not mentioned in the Port Blake project at all, but it's being mentioned here separately. And so I'm just thinking, I don't see how that has anything to do with revitalization project. So why isn't this a capital item all on its own, just like the Gator that we have for the cemetery project?
Okay, Ms. Paulson, do you have a comment?
Through the mayor, that's certainly something council can change. Recommend a change from one reserve to another.
Comments, Councillor Oak?
Yeah, you're correct, Councillor Vaughn, that that wasn't part of the original project. But there's a lot of things that we've done now in this Port Blake that wasn't part of the original project that we've done drainage and sunset deck, and a bunch of those things weren't part of the original project. Not to the scale that they were done there, or they were supposed to be maybe done differently from the original concept. The sunset deck was supposed to be significantly different than what was ultimately done and scaled back. So because of the location and what you could do with the the bank and everything else. So there was a lot of changes to that plan. So not to say that this shouldn't be a separate project. Not saying that, but I just wanted to clarify the original scope of the Port Blake project is a lot different than what was originally outlined. We've had a number of versions of it over the last number of years.
And Amanda, this Gator would be we use solely for Port Blake completely. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the Gator is solely used for Port Blake during the seasonal months there to help kind of maintain the facilities throughout the season. So it is a Port Blake Gator.
Thank you. Comments?
I do have a comment. I wouldn't disagree with Councillor Oak that scope creep has been a plague for this project from the get-go. I just see this piece of equipment being yet another scope creep item that I don't think has any place in revitalization of a park. It's a replacement of a piece of equipment. And I don't understand why they stand on their own everywhere else in the municipality, but because it's Port Blake, we'll just shove it into that project. I think it should stand alone outside of that project.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? Deputy, go ahead.
Just a follow-up to Councillor Vaughn. I'm in agreement a little bit. There is going to be more and more revenue coming out of there every year that will go back into recreation to help pay for this gator. So I guess I don't want to shortchange the rest of what we're trying to do at Port Blake to take that money out of there. So maybe we can look at it as a 2 or 3 year project where that revenue goes into that. Maybe that's something we can do instead of taking it out of the revitalization. Thank you.
Any other comments from members of council? It's in the, go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, I agree. It's a capital item that is equipment that, you know, wasn't part of the original scope. The idea of the original project was to, you know, to beautify the area and make it more user friendly and accessible. So, yeah, I can see where you're coming from with this as a separate capital item.
Ms. Masood Paulson.
Through the mayor, then if council's in agreement of that, at some point, if there could be a resolution moving the payment for that, and whether it would be tax levy or whether we could check and see about the recreation replacement reserve, that would be, then we could change it on this form.
Okay, comments? Anyone wish to comment on that? Just Councillor Vaughn.
Okay, so are we looking for a resolution? Because we can only give a half of a resolution in terms of moving it from this revitalization fund, but charging it to, I'm not sure.
I'll have to look to the director, acting director, to see whether or not the should be levy at this point, or whether there's enough in the recreation replacement reserve.
Through you, Mayor, there wouldn't be enough in the reserve as we do not count grants until we've received them. So for all of the projects that we have with grant funding applied for, that is the backup, is that comes out of the reserve. So there is not room in the recreation reserve to take this as well.
Deputy, comment?
Can we, when we get our report from Port Blake, can we take a look at the numbers there and see how I'm just trying to get this over more than 1 year. I'm not saying borrow the money, but maybe we could see what we made or brought in this year. Maybe that would help us decide where that money's going to come from. Because I think there's got to be a pretty good revenue from there to help pay for this down the road.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification, Aaron, the Recreation Capital Replacements Reserve is showing that it's going to have about 695,000 at the end of December. Now, I know we've looked at 400,000 for 447,000 for ball diamonds. What else is coming out of that replacement reserve?
Through the mayor, yeah, you are correct. I was missing that those were carry forward projects that were also coming out of there and Port Blake. So yes, there actually is room, because you're correct. It's the 370,000 that is coming out of the reserve, and then otherwise everything else is already committed that's coming out of the reserve.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Councillor Oak.
I don't have a problem making a motion to have that come out of the Recreation Capital Reserve.
Okay, Councillor Deputy, you have a comment? Okay, so we'll go with.
Because
the-
we, like, Deputy Mayor said, we have, revenue, generation that's occurring more and more all the time there. And so I think that's a proper source of funding for it.
So I'll ask the Madam Clerk to prepare that recommendation. Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Just a clarification. So we had the Port Blake reserve and that was carried forward for the last number of years. Is there enough funding in that reserve to cover the potential costs of the washrooms and whatever else needs to be done plus the skater?
Go ahead, Amanda.
Through the mayor, so we would have to get some pricing back on everything that we hope to do at that location. I can't say for certain right now, just because I don't have costs of repairing the concrete pad and what it's going to take to upgrade the washrooms inside as well as the paths.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, I would only add to that or tell Councillor Neeb that this isn't a lot of money when you're looking at that washroom revitalization and you're looking at a new cement pad in front, which is why I'm showing some passion here about let's not add to the scope creep that we've plagued this project before, because I have seen the washroom renovation figures from years gone by and we've had to put it to the side. Preferably to deal with our drainage issues first. And we finally got that on them. So I'd really like to see this washroom money and the AOD, which is a little bit extra too, stay by itself rather than add a gator to it.
Councillor Clerk.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. And I agree. I understand it. Just asking the question because initially this was put in the budget, right? So if it was, but it sounds as though if it's based on figures from years past, then we will need to adjust. So I'm fine with reallocating it in another area of the budget.
Okay, thank you. And I'll turn to Madam Clerk for the recommendation.
That South Huron Council reallocate the 2025 CS03 Community Services Gator Project funding come from the Recreational Capital Replacement Reserve.
Councillor Oak, so moved. Deputy Mayor, seconded. Is there any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Oak. Something?
Just wondering what everybody's thoughts are, whether we stop at this point in time.
Yes, we are planning on doing that, yes. Yep. Okay. And it's agreeable with everyone? Okay. Okay, let's turn to Mr. Carlson.
Okay, through the mayor, I'll just make a note and we'll make a note in the minutes that we've stopped at the end of the recreation services capital. And our next budget meeting will start at the transportation services capital projects.
Councillor Neeb.
Through the chair, just wanting to double check. Does that mean that we'd be starting with transportation services next and we have fully complete? I'm just wondering, did we have any discussion about the CS04?
Yeah, there's no
Oh,
way-
I thought we had, the mayor had brought it up and then we went back to the,
Okay,
but I thought it was already on there that nobody had any questions about it.
Yeah, well, that's correct. We've discussed,
Sorry.
we were that far and then we went back and now we're.
that's
beyond
okay.
that.
Just
So-
clarifying. Thank you.
That's fine. So we'll be starting at page 61-114, the 2025 TSO2. Okay. Mrs.
Okay.
Carlson.
So the recommendation is that South Huron Council hereby adjourn at 6:29 PM.
So moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. No discussion, call the question, all in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank